Hey guys, Cade Wilcox here, host of the Primitive Podcast. On this week's episode, we have Jimmy Moore. Jimmy is the CEO and president of the Lubbock Children's Home, and just a really great conversation about his background in leadership and his unique journey to the leadership role he has now. Thoroughly enjoyed my time with Jimmy, and I'm confident you're going to get a lot of value and insight out of this episode.
It blows me away because if you'd asked me this years ago, I would have said I'm not a leader. Everybody sees things in us that we do not see. We're our toughest critics. I want for folks to walk in and know that they have just as much skill set to be leading or guiding people to the proper places. My role right now is to make sure that I can enable them to do those things, whether that be that we switch roles or we do cross-training in different departments. But today I would say more than anything is allowing them to make decisions, allowing them to see failure as an opportunity to get back up and try it again.
Well, Jimmy, really appreciate you joining the Primitive Podcast. Thanks for being here. Really excited for me to get to know you, but also for those who listen to the podcast. So for those who don't know Jimmy Moore and the Children's Home and all that good stuff, tell us a little bit about you and your background and the work you do.
Oh, wow. There's going to be people to find out a lot about me because I've been so many different places. Jimmy Moore grew up in a little town of Morton, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Of course, I grew up in a world of what I call my Brady Bunch world. My mom was previously married, dad previously married, and I happened to be the last of all the siblings. So I got to witness a lot of good, bad, and ugly growing up. And I come from an abusive background as a family. Unfortunately, my dad was killed by my mom through domestic violence, so you'll learn a lot about why I do what I do. And of course, being the youngest, didn't quite understand it at that time, but I've used it today throughout the trek in history of whatever job I've taken or whether it's been choosing my wife and you name it. But I've held plenty of jobs in this area. It's not because I couldn't keep one. It was just because I always tell people it's hard to hit a moving target. And I have worked in the law enforcement side here in Lubbock County. I have been an athletic coach at several schools here in LISD. I have been a collegiate coach both on the women and men's side of athletics. I've been athletic director at Lubbock Christian University. I've been a principal here in the school district. I've been an HR director here in the school district.
You don't look that old, man.
That's what they tell me, but I'm telling you, if you look close enough, you'll find some gray. So I've held a lot of jobs, but I think I've held them because that's kind of been my path. And I didn't realize it years ago, what I went through in my life, but now I look back and I can see where things were just working to align to where I am today. I'm happily married man, almost 33 years. I have 2 adult children, and now I have 4 grandkids.
That's amazing.
My son is in Hawaii with one of my grandkids, so I have to get my wife there soon. And I have a daughter here in town with the other 3 kiddos.
That's
so
awesome.
My life is what you would call, I guess, fulfilled in some ways, but at the same time knowing that as God calls, I go.
That's awesome. How long have you been at the Children's Home?
I have been at the Children's Home now for almost 5 years. I have recently returned and loving every minute of it.
That's awesome. So for those who aren't familiar with the Children's Home, maybe just give us a little bit about the vision and the purpose and the background of the Children's Home.
Okay. The home, of course, our vision is manifesting Christ through excellence in child care. Our mission is to take care of kids in a collaborative environment to make sure that we reunify mom and dads with their kids. That's the ultimate goal. We work with the State Department, which we would call Department of Family and Protective Services. And like I said before, our goal is to make sure that if kids need therapy, if families need therapy, that we can reunite families and get them back together. That's not always possible. Unfortunately, there's parents who give up during the process, or the judge or the state decides that there needs to be a separation. And therefore, we try to find foster families, and we try to find adoptive parents to take care of these kids moving forward. We also take care of kids that a lot of people wouldn't realize this from birth to age 21. Within the last 2.5 years, we start taking care of the older kids because once they foster out, who do they have to look to? If they do not have family in the community, if they don't have good friends or any type of connection, we want to make sure to help them get there. Therefore, we started what we call a supervised independent living program, which we call it SEAL. And we help those kids get on their feet, and they also have a soft place to fail, or fall.
Right.
If something happens, they know that we're there. We don't want to just do a lot of hand-me-down, but we try to teach them to be productive citizens.
How many kids do you have under your care at any given time?
Oh, goodness. We could have up to 110 at any given time.
And does it fluctuate based on those variables you were sharing a moment ago?
Yes, and even with the pandemic right now, we have more kids who have not been placed back with families or have been reunified with cousins or aunts or uncles or whoever it may be. But at the same time, those numbers have increased for those who are needing a place to stay. And so I think this past year we've seen 186 statewide who have slept in offices because there's no placement. And that means they have to go 2 consecutive days to be counted. So that's 186 kiddos, and that's a high number.
Is this, you mentioned the pandemic, has this been one of the more difficult kind of seasons that you've experienced in all your years being connected and associated with the children's home?
It really has. And I would say part of that is because, you don't have control of it. Usually any situations you have some say-so or some ways to strategically make some things go away or make them comfortable. In a situation where you're dealing with 110 kids and then another 100 staff members, and you're trying to tell them day after day that things are going to be okay, but I'm not walking their walk or living their life, it makes it really tough.
Sure.
You start looking at some of what we call vicarious trauma, parallel processing and trauma, and that means that maybe some of the staff who have had hurt in their life are looking at a kid now, and that's resurging, I guess I'm trying to say, and reemerging, and now they're struggling.
Yeah, and all being exasperated by like you said, a circumstance you can't control in the pandemic and all the variables that come with that.
Yes.
So when you think of your role at the children's home and your role of leadership, like when you think leadership in general, what comes to mind? How do you see your role as a leader?
It blows me away because if you'd asked me this years ago, I would have said I'm not a leader. Everybody sees things in us that we do not see. We're our toughest critics. I think mine is distributed leadership. I want to be able for folks to walk in and know that they have just as much, and I don't even want to use power, but just as much skill set to be leading or guiding people to the proper places. My role right now is to make sure that I can enable them to do those things, whether that be that we switch roles or we do cross-training in different departments. But today I would say more than anything is allowing them to make decisions, allowing them to see failure as an opportunity to get back up and try it again. I went to Harvard years ago. Backdoor to Harvard is what I always tell people. I was in the Principal Leadership Academy, and I just happened to be going through the courses, and it was paid by H.E.B. Butts. So thank you, H.E.B.
There you go.
And I enjoyed every bit of my time. But on the way out, I had one of the professors there at Harvard pull me to the side and say, hey, we want you to come back next year, all paid trip. All your expenses are paid for, but we see you as someone who can help us in our programming. And that's probably the first time I have been kind of set back and floored. I've seen a lot of things happen in my life that I didn't believe in as far as what was leadership, but that was one time I was like, wow, okay, it is true. I guess it took Harvard to tell me that. But anywho, I just think when it comes to leadership, it's hard for me to pinpoint Jimmy being a leader, but the only way I can see it happening is through the Spirit.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's not Jimmy in the flesh. It's what's been instilled in me that I never knew that could come out of me.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. What's your best guess on why so many leaders feel that kind of imposter syndrome? I mean, like, why do you think that is?
For me, I live in an introverted world myself. And so for me to come out of that introverted world and to be able to speak out is exhausting. I get home, I'm tired. And I'm wondering if it's just the fact that, we know that we're made in His image.
Right.
And we know all the things He had set before us. But when you go back in time and you start reading, I don't think there was anybody who stood up and said, I'm the world's best leader.
Right.
And I think it's innately built in us to second guess ourselves. And so I kind of take it from that standpoint is that in the flesh, we can't understand it. We can't fathom it. But for others, we rely on them to kind of decide who we are and what we are.
Yeah,
There's
that's good.
probably many leaders walking Avenue Q right now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, that's good. I sometimes struggle with it because I'm the most acutely aware of my own failure and my own shortcomings. And so to kind of process those realities that are kind of in front of you and also consider yourself a leader can sometimes be difficult to work through, because you know those shortcomings and where those gaps are. So thanks for sharing that. You mentioned a second ago kind of empowering your people to embrace failure and working through that. How have you as a leader dealt with failure and tried to learn from it and kind of handled and processed failure?
Well, I just know that the next day I'm going to wake up and someone's going to ask me to take on another task. That's one way. The world has not stopped evolving or revolving because Jimmy messed up 24 hours ago. I think one of the things I learned years ago, and it was probably through a 6'3" white gentleman which I would call my dad today. He kind of filled that role. He saw something in me years ago. Fortunately, I was a guy who was able to take on a role of being a basketball player. I never thought I was good enough to get a scholarship, but I did, and it paid for my education. But it took that gentleman to pull me aside one day and says, "Jimmy, why are you running around with a certain group that you're running around with?" And I didn't have an answer for him, but I think I know today because they were more apt to accept me, no matter if it was good or bad. And he said, "You're better than this." And that's all it took him to say, "You're better than this, and this is what I want you to do." And, for how old is Jimmy today? I can't give you my real age. So 50 some odd years later, here I am with this connection with this gentleman. And I think a lot of it too was I didn't have the male role model that I needed. I had a strong female role model, and I didn't have the male role model. So I think a lot of it when I look back it's just about the people crossing my path at the right time to really repeat probably what I already knew, but I had to hear it from someone else. Whether that was school teachers to people around the corner in the neighborhood. Just here recently, someone cornered me and said, "Jimmy Moore, you were such a quiet kid in school." In my mind, I was like, I was the worst kid in school. How in the world can they say I was the quietest kid in school? And I may be able to share a story with you later that really impacted me about leadership. I may do it now.
Yeah, go for it. No, please.
I attended a funeral of a great baseball coach that I had when I was younger, a Little League baseball coach. At that time that he took me in on his team, I was struggling. I felt like in my life we were homeless. I was staying in my grandfather's church because we didn't have anywhere to live. And for a kid growing up, that's hard on the image because people look at you, they know, the talk gets going in town and everything else. Well, this family took me in and they dropped me off every day after practice at that church, but never questioned whether or not I was homeless or not. So he passes away, the family calls me, I go to the funeral, and when I get there, they pull me up to the front to sit with the family. And I'm like, wow, why am I even here? Place me. And then so I go through the whole funeral. They asked me to speak and talk about G.W. Lyons, and I got up and I spoke. We go to the graveside, and I was a bad kid in my image when I was a sixth grader. I was going through what they always say. He's going through puberty. He's going through having problems. And I was ugly to my teacher. Her name was Miss Outhouse. That should give you a clue. And so I took it and just ran with it and tried to be the tough bully type kid and not listen to teachers. But I'm at the gravesite, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, you know my wife." And he explains that his wife is this lady who was Miss Outhouse. Well, there was a show that was on many years ago where a guy would go back and apologize for all the things he did wrong that was on his bucket list. Well, she was on my bucket list. And the guy came up to me. I go, "Hey, could you please tell her?" And I pulled out a business card and I gave it to him that I so much apologized that I was such an ugly kid and whatever. And he goes, "Oh, no, she never complained about you being a bad kid." But that was something I was living with my whole life. And I think that's what kind of kept me back, too, from whenever people talk about leadership. It's like you said before, I had all these blemishes that I could remember that was on me. And so I looked at it more as a tangible than an intangible. Yeah.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. You've already alluded to quite a few people that have seemed to make a big impact on your life. And so have you in your lifetime experienced like the benefit and the power of kind of people inviting you to things? I don't mean like literally inviting you to things, but just the affirmation they've given you. You know, you were talking about that gentleman who said, "Hey, you're better than this. You can do better than this." And so has that played a huge role, do you think, in your leadership journey of people just inviting you to think bigger, to be better, and to just kind of move beyond some of those things you're experiencing?
Yes. And just, again, here recently, one of them was Russ.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just talked about Russ and having a conversation with him and just listening to all the words he was saying. And I'm like, wow, But, this morning, this week actually, had an organization call me. It's called Network 127, after James 127. And she spoke out and she says, Jimmy, hey, I need to get you on the board. You have so much to offer for us here on the board. And really, I would like you also, because I think you can do it, lead this conference in 2023. And I'm like, what? Me lead a conference? So all those things, they steadily come no matter what age you are. And I think that's the other thing that we've done for so many years is that you had to be a certain age to be a leader. You had to be maybe at some time a certain race to be a leader. Mm-hmm. Or you have to be a certain, male or female to be a leader. And so we come through all this thought that's out there. But it's amazing who come to you later, who will come to you later and say, hey, how about this? And they don't know you no more than the man on the moon, but there's something that they see in you.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that I have seen as I get older is that, Jimmy, if someone did this for you, what do you do in return? Because you've gone through the steps. And that's where I find myself today. There was a young man that has some street basketball that he does here in town to help build up youth and keep them off the streets. And he called me a while back, and I was like, why did he call me? Well, it dawned on me I had cut him. I was a coach, and I had cut him from the team. How many people that you cut from a team call you back years later and say, you were a role model in my life? That doesn't really, to me, that doesn't add up. Yeah. That's the last person I want to call is the person who cut me, unless I'm calling them to say, oh, look at me now, But he called me and said, you know what, you're the first person who believed in me, who was going to give me an opportunity to be part of a program. Mm-hmm. He said, but if you can recall, I didn't make my grades, and you told me you have to get your grades up in order to play. I've forgotten that story.
Yeah.
So I look at those things too, and every time you turn around with on the streets, or no matter what you're doing, you'll find the example of what you've been called to do.
Yeah, it's really good. I think that a leader has a lot of responsibilities, but I would say that one of them is this idea of invitation. Inviting people to, maybe it's see themselves as they truly are, or an opportunity like you've talked about, like Russ inviting you to consider this type of thing or whatever. I mean, it's so many people are never invited to think bigger or do differently. And so it can be a powerful thing.
Right.
How do you how do you approach your own personal growth? You have all these things kind of coming at you. You're trying to carry, at least in some part, the burden of your house families and the children that you're caring for. So how do you focus and approach your own personal growth to stay inspired and encouraged and always growing?
I think I usually jump on the thing that I'm more apt to say no to. I mentioned before being an introvert. I think one thing about introverts, we know how to say no enough to stay in our little corners. But anything that gives me just a little bit of uneasiness is a thing that I probably need to be praying on a little bit more to take on those challenges. And what I've learned from those is that's what's created the growth in me, is taking on things that are not easy. There's so many times that things have been pretty easy that's come my way, whether it's been take this job, we give you a raise. But when you start looking at the overall picture of it, take this job, get this school from being a low-performing school to being a top-notch school in the state, and you have 3 years to do it. If you don't do it in 3 years, we're going to find someone else to do it. How many people take those jobs?
Yeah.
Or come into this situation that we're facing now, even at the home. There's a federal lawsuit that's out there. We may not be around the same way we were around 5 years ago, but we're depending on you to come in here and tell us which direction, or show us which direction, or lead which direction we should go. And I think I take those opportunities more than I ever had. I get older and I blame it on energy sometimes. I was like, I don't know if I have the energy to do this. And that's the honest truth in some ways. And when I say that, I'm talking more of a mental thing because, failure is okay, but enough failure can consume a person. And they just feel like they're, probably had all that they could take and would probably not take up some of those tasks that are presented before them. But I think a lot of it is just I want to grow. And I don't want to be one of those people. As I worked in the HR field years ago, where it comes a day that I have to make a decision whether I have the energy to do it. It's not based on the salary that I'm making, but it's based on the effort I can put into it.
That's good. This is my favorite question to ask. But if you could speak to your younger self, in your 20s, 30s, like knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back 20 years?
Well, the first one would be, Jimmy, you're not going to be a professional basketball player. I would say that, I hear that so much and it's okay to dream.
Sure, for sure.
But that would be the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say is you need to start doing more in your community. You need to start volunteering. You need to start giving back. I think of so many things I could have done in a little town of Morton, Texas, that was probably not, that I didn't see at that time. Whether it was going to nursing homes, whether it was going to hospitals or serving differently in the church or, there's so many things out there that I felt like I could have given up then. The thing that I start to see is you see a lot more people going out and doing community work than you've ever seen. A lot of that started because schools start pushing it as far as the upper level collegiate. They want to see it on your resume. But just what it gives back to you, as far as that it's not about you in the end. It's about what you can do for others. I wish I would have been able to take that on much earlier than I did in my life. And, of course, that may be the same thing. People may say, well, you used to do those things for us. But to me, I didn't do it not quite as much as I needed to.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for joining the podcast. It's been really great to get to know you.
This has been awesome. I appreciate what you do, and anytime you need anything like this, know that the Children's Home of Lubbock has many angles and opportunities out there that we'll be willing to help.
It's awesome. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.